Okay, so Dad, why don't you tell the folks why you built the tractor, when you built it, and how you got the money to build it?
Okay, originally on our farm, my brother and my dad and I each had our own land, and we each had our own equipment, but we shared the equipment and worked the land together. Okay, and then what had happened was in the earlier years, at least when I started farming, in fact I bought my first quota when I was 17, and things went real easy. And then we started losing crops to hail and like flooding out and stuff, and of course a lot of our land was being cleared from like that you wouldn't get away with probably today, swamp and you know, willows and whatnot. We'd clear it and then farm it.
And where was this?
What?
What state? Where was this?
It is in northern Minnesota.
Okay.
It wasn't in the Red River Valley. We were just east of the actual valley. We were out east of the ridges, and it would have been different if we'd have probably been in the valley. But anyway, what had happened, we started losing our crops, so things were getting a little tighter financially. So my brother had a TD9 International, which is a steel crawler, and I had a WD9 rubber tractor. And we would do custom work in the community there. But we were tied up in the fall, you know, plowing the land and getting it ready for next spring. So we decided to build one. We were going to either buy or build a tractor big enough so that my dad could actually do all the fall work, so we could go out and earn some extra money. And some think that the Steiger tractor was the first four-wheel drive out there. That's not true. Wagner was out there, and we had gone and looked at Wagners, and my brother sort of liked steel crawlers, so he sort of leaned into just getting a big international steel crawler. But then when he saw the Wagner, the four-wheel drive sort of helped him swing them. But I always liked rubber. It was cleaner and quieter, you know. So anyway, so what happened, we went to the banker, and I was, of course, 23, 24 years old, and I thought he was an old man. I suppose he was 50. And he was sort of on the heavy set side, and he'd sat behind the desk there and went in there and said, thought we could buy a new one for about $25,000, but we thought we could build one out of used parts for about $10,000, but it'd have to borrow the money. Oh, he said, I'll borrow you the money to build one. When you think about it, back in those days, for a banker to just hang out like that and say, I'll borrow you the money to build a tractor to some farm people, you know, farmers. So that's how we decided then that we were going to build a tractor. And the end of that.
So then you decided to build a second tractor, which was called the Model 105. Why did you decide to build that tractor?
Well, the first one had about 200 and some flywheel horsepower. Now this is flywheel horsepower, it's not drawbars. There's a difference, you know. And yes, my dad was able to do all the fall work then, and we'd go out and earn. But the thing about it was that the efficiency, which we didn't even realize how efficient it was going to be for us, we decided we wanted a small one to pull the grain drills and like harrows and the light stuff. So we actually built one half size, and so we did the heavy work with the big one and the light work with the. Basically, those two machines done most of the tillage and seeding and that. We still had. I think we still had the WD9s, and yeah, I know we did, and the TD9s, but they did the actual field work for us. In fact, Magina drove I think the 105, the light one, the little one, yeah. So she knew what they were about, yeah.
So you built a few more for some local people that wanted the 105s, but then a few years later you met Earl Christensen. And how did you meet him, and what happened with Earl?
Well, what happened is some of the neighbors and decided they would like to have the small one, and I'm gonna go against some of the reports and story. I think Edgar Naplin ordered the very first one.
Oh.
Anyway,
number
because
3.
he was next, yeah, he was right next door neighbor almost to us. So, but I can't remember clear. You know, I'm just about 84 years old. So anyway, and this happened like 60 years ago or more. Yes, and then what happened? We had built those few, and as strange as it might be, we did do sort of a type of serial numbering, and it was on the horn that we stamped, with the steering horns, I called them, and we stamped the number. And anyway, another thing that probably is a little interesting is that people would ask why they were chartreuse, and there's all kinds of wild stories, and some of it was in Fargo. At that time I was in other business, so I was on the board down there, but for promotion reasons, the advertising people and stuff, the story was out that we had a well house out there that was that color, and we had paint left over, and we painted them that color. That's not true. What had happened on the very first unit, the big planetary axles, we got them out in the Iron Range, which is probably less than a couple hundred miles from where we were, and we got the axles out there, and they were out of dark trucks, and transmission came from out there. And we got the engine from engine supplier in Minneapolis, and then Dart wasn't that color, but Euclid was that color. That is industrial equipment like scrapers and crawlers and whatnot. And I thought, for a farm, you didn't see that color much on farm. Owatonna made some swathers that color, but otherwise you didn't hardly see that color out, and I thought it would stand out. So I don't know what is going on that we ever thought we'd actually be a tractor company or anything. But when you think about trying to pick a color that would stand out and stuff, there must have been a subconscious something going on. And so anyhow, they were chartreuse, and actually the first ones we bought Euclid green and then painted the wheels red. Then there was like in the wintertime, sort of like a livestock show up there. There was one in Crookston, Minnesota, which is about 22 miles away, and then one in Valley City, North Dakota. And they had cattle there, and pigs and everything that they showed, but there was also machinery that, because I'm sure International, everybody was there showing their equipment too. And Earl Christensen, who, by the way, was a Wagner dealer. I don't know if many people realize that, but I don't know if he had sold any yet or not, but he had the dealership. He heard about us, and he came out to the farm, and he said, if you build them out of new parts, I'll sell them. And of course, we believed him. We're pretty innocent, and he did. He was, and he's still living today. He's in a nursing home in Battle Lake, I think, Minnesota. But I found out over the years that just like beautiful women have better chance even in business, and so do handsome, tall men. And because I had some salesmen later on, and I could see that it was much easier. Earl was not of that feature or anything, but he made up for it in aggressiveness, and he was so determined that he sold upstream. You got to remember, you could buy 3 John Deeres that would each pull about 5 bottoms for less money than you could buy 1 Steiger tractor. So it was an uphill battle, but he sold them. But then his dad died of cancer. Now I'm probably getting ahead of the questions. But his dad died of cancer, so he had to go back. They also had an L. Chalmers dealership. By that time, of course, we had gone far enough so we were more than just building for neighbors and stuff. So I remember I had hired some regional salespeople, like for L. Chalmers, and I'd tried quite a few, and it wasn't flying. So I became very involved in sales, which was not my world, because I suppose this would have, back then a year was a lot longer than it is now when I'm 80 something. But I bet it wasn't more than 5, 6, 7 years before that when I got done, when we harvested and I was going to sell my grain, my dad had to go along with me. I was that shy to go to the elevator and sell grain. Now, just these few years later, I'm out there trying to compete with the big guys, So it was very stressful for me. And my brother ran the shop, but I was responsible for sales and, you might say, finance and also service. And
you also did the design of all the tractors.
I also designed them originally, but then I was responsible to get them sold and then service and everything. And I had gotten to the point where I couldn't even drink a can of like Mountain Dew or something. And I was just, I suppose I was by that time, probably 27, 26, 27. So a group of 8 men from Fargo area came up and they wanted to move it to Fargo. I think I'm getting ahead of myself.
Go ahead, no, it's fine.
So they came up and wanted to buy control. So we sold 52% to this group of 8 people, and it has moved to Fargo. And there, of course, my brother and I disagreed. I sort of saw the writing on the wall. The big people were coming in, John Deere, and the rest of them were coming with big 4-wheel drives. And I knew what it was out there trying to get them sold. And so it has moved to Fargo. And anyway, so there was the first early years in Fargo, there was some struggles up and down, and almost went under a couple times. But some of the things that I totally disagreed with the first group, I look back and if almost miracles hadn't happened, it would have went under. But they had spent so much money in promotion. So then finally, Les Melrose came in with. Not positive I was on the board, but I understand it was like $750,000, and that is gone in 1 year. And then finally, his brother-in-law, Jack Johnson, he brought them in too, and the time must have been right for us all this promotion. Not that they didn't do a great job of managing, they did, but still, I think it would have been different if they had picked up the 3-4 years earlier. It would have been different for them too, but it took off. And of course, from then on, you sort of got the story. I guess I told the whole thing. You didn't ask any questions. But anyway, what happened then, of course, they started out in almost a shack down in Fargo that is worse than our barn shop. And then the first year we built the biggest one, and they just, you might say, marketed them. Then they built the smaller one. And then finally they started building the whole line. But
I think a lot of people thought that when Steiger moved to Fargo that they moved right into the factory, but it's not true. That they actually went into like rented warehouses and stuff like that to build their tractors until the factory was built.
Well, it wasn't a warehouse. It was an old plant that was used for something like that before. In fact, if I remember right, they made tanks in there, fuel tanks, and maybe culverts. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I can remember how it looked. You could see through the walls, the holes, and so it was very humble. But then we did rent. Running out of time.
No.
And then they rented a pretty decent place once it started taking off, and when Gene Dahl and Jack Johnson were there. And then there should be a picture someplace of Gene Dahl and Jack and I with a spade, of course, and they built the facility that's there today. However, it's been added on again since that. But if I remember clearly, that was 10 acres on a roof, the first new facility that was built there. And it was designed, and this is just what the board members heard, but it is designed that it could build a tractor in there every 18 minutes. So that takes us up almost to, and of course, along the way, International Harvester bought a third interest in the company, and of course that helped get financing, and then when International went down, Deutz bought the International position. And then when the 80 crash came, of course they had to file 11. And what had happened, I was involved with originally he was from Minneapolis, and we owned a company, and we ended up making front end loaders. And actually competing with the Melrose that had just sold out to Clark. But they were out of that then, and then we were making loaders.
And then...
And since I knew the top guys at International, the plan was, before International went down, is that the company we had in Thief River that made loaders was called Hydermag. And International had planned on doing the same thing with me up at Thief River. as they did at the tractor company. And I had a board member that was very influential in Thief River, and they persuaded me to bring him down to the meeting when we were going to close with International to do the same as in Fargo. So International would have been a part of another big thing, because at our peak, when we built for IH and Gale and ourselves, we were the third largest producer of skid steers in the world for a while. But what happened, this board member had another big business in town, and he betrayed me and talked International out of going along with the deal, because the top guys at International called me down to Chicago a week later or so and said, you should sue him, because he did that because he needed work at his plant, and he wanted them to make their plastic parts for their trucks up there in his plant. The problem that I had my whole life is that a lot of times I didn't want to start trouble, and rather than to go along with International, where I probably had the muscle, and I didn't want to start trouble in the community, which probably would have changed the history of that area too. And that happened to me, and I look back over my life quite a few times when I could have really bettered myself, and I worried about what somebody else would think.
And going back to, if you don't mind, going back to Steiger,
Yeah.
and when you were selling, you said you were really shy, but eventually you kind of came out of that.
Out of
and
what?
You were shy when you were younger, but eventually you overcame that. And the story about Connie Danielson is a good story.
I don't think, I'm 84 years old now. I don't give a hoot anymore, but if you even went back 4 or 5 years ago, I'd have a hard time talking like this, and or a little longer than that maybe. And so I've always been a little shy, always was. I felt a little inferior. But I also was the kind of a guy that would do what I had to do. If I was forced into a corner, I would finally do something, So yeah, I took on sales, and it might have seemed like I wasn't shy, but inside I was, yeah.
Well, do you want to tell the story about Connie Danielson, or no?
Well, yeah, this was, of course, after Earl wasn't with us. We had a dealership in Fargo, North Dakota, and that is before it went to Fargo. It was before it went to Fargo. And one morning, of course, I used to get up earlier in the morning, but anyway, it was like 7:30 in the morning out on the farm. We had all three models lined up right we had sort of like a circular area, and they were out there, and there was a man standing there with his son, and I guess he was 12 years old. And I walk up on him, and I could hear better back then too than I can now. And I heard him tell his son that, he said, this is a Cadillac of tractors, and you're going to be driving one next summer. So, what I thought, well, yeah, he's going to buy one. So I called our dealer in Fargo, and he sends their salesman up there, and oh yeah, he's going to buy one. You look back, you wonder why. If he's going to buy one, why they didn't have the order. But anyway, this was probably right around the first year, and then as it went on, we were getting the order, and I'd call the dealer, and then, oh yeah, he's going to buy one, and we just haven't gotten the order yet. And it finally went, and Versatile came on the scene, and they were almost a third less. And what had happened was, finally, Versatile had gotten to this farmer and persuaded him, buy one for a third less. Well, you can imagine how disappointed I was because our volume wasn't that big. And then, so I called the dealership and said, I heard he's going to buy a Versatile. Yeah. He decided, he said, what are we going to do? They're a third cheaper. And I said, well, but he said he was going to buy ours. And I said, I'd like to go out there with your salesman. Oh, that's no use. It's no use to go there. He's made up his mind. And I said, well, please, send him up. I'd like to go out there. And that is by Crookston, which is about 25 miles away. So he did. He sent him up, and we go there, and we get to his farm, and he had a nicer farm office than we did. And and we got out of the vehicle. Of course, he knew me. He said, hey, I'm not buying anything. He said, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to do anything. I said, well, I'd just like to visit with you. And what I had done, I had taken all the books like on the engine and transmissions and everything with. And finally, we got into his office and sat there, and I was going through the stuff, and I don't know how interested he was or anything, but while I was talking about all this stuff, finally he picks up the phone and calls his wife in the house and said, we're coming in for a coffee. And I don't know what goes through your mind right now, but you gotta know what went through my mind. Well, he's weakening or whatever, so we get ready, we're going into the house, and as we're walking up, and there was concrete steps, I'll still remember, and in the kitchen there's a round table with oilcloth on it, and as we're walking up the concrete steps, I asked the salesman, I said, have you got the order book? And Connie, the farmer, said, no, I'm not buying. And in the meantime, the salesman said, no, he didn't have the order book. And I said, well, you better get it, regardless of what is going on there. I was desperate. I said, you better get it. So he ran out to the car and got it. We get into the house and sit down at the kitchen table, and we barely get talking, and his wife comes and puts her arm around him and said, Connie, this has been bothering you all winter. Why did you just do it and get it over with?
And then what happened the next morning?
Well, then what happened was the next morning, here he is standing out there in the middle of the yard again, and I thought, he thought it over, he's going to back out. And when I came walking up to him, he gave me a hug and said, I had my first good night's sleep.
Oh, wow.
So sometimes people want help
Yeah.
making up their mind. I learned that at that time, and I used that several times after that in other businesses where we had actually lost sales, and it's unbelievable. When someone even wanted something, the salesman wouldn't take the order. And I had one in Wisconsin on a loader, similar thing. He'd already bought a different brand. I already placed the order, he'd already ordered it. And I was able to talk him into taking it back and taking one of ours. So it's a little different than my early days, But I'm really not very good at selling a product, to be honest with you. I'm a little better at selling a dream, I don't have them as much anymore, and if I did, it wouldn't do any good. What?
From my observing you over the last, my 60 years, you're really good at marketing. You do have good ideas.
What?
You have good ideas, especially in the marketing and promotion area, generally. So, but when you decided to go into the business with Earl and Morris and Grandpa John, then you made a decision about what model you were going to start with. Why don't you talk about that model and why you picked that model?
Well, the 2200 was basically about the same size as the original one made out of used parts. I got a little story to tell you there too, though. If you look at the original one, the fenders were shaped round like this, maybe a little bit like
Wagner's.
Wagner.
Yeah.
But then when Earl and I were visiting, he said he sketched the fender like this. Earl actually did. And he asked if I could make it like that. I said, yeah, we can make it look like that. And that's why the oil tanks were in the front fenders in the corner. They went up. And the hydraulic oil tanks. But Earl had something to do with the looks of the very first ones. And then we cut a V in the grill because they were V designed engines, V6s. The 2200 had a V6 71, and the 1700 had a V6 53. So, and then of course we finally came with the 1250 because we felt like we needed something to compete down in that class. And I don't know whether that really done us any good because that isn't what we were really known for. We were known for the bigger stuff. And finally, of course, we came with a 3300 that is a V8 71. And just as it is moving to Fargo, we deserted the Detroit diesel. And the reason for it was I sensed a resistance. The horsepower was there, but farmers were used to, when the load got heavy, the engine would bark. And a two-cylinder or two-cycle didn't do that, it whined more. And so we were switching to Cummins and Caterpillar, which is a four-cycle. So they made more, I shouldn't say noise, but that's about it. It's about like kids with straight pipes, you know. But farmers wanted that. They wanted to hear that it didn't work. And I felt like it was hurting sales, and that's why we went to the Cummins. And just as it was moving to Fargo, we had just designed into those models. And then, the one was a 300 and some horsepower V8 Cummins, called a 903. And we called it, if we'd have kept building them on the farm, it would have been a 2250. But we made them on the farm. When they got to Fargo, they put an animal name on them. I guess I got that from International and some of them, that I didn't like the idea of calling them animals. I thought it didn't sound like horsepower, you know. Numbers sounded more, but I guess the animals sold too, the way it looked.
Well, it set you apart from everybody out there.
What?
The name set you apart from the other tractors you compete against.
Yeah.
What were the animal names?
Well, you got to know why the animal names came into it. Have you figured that out?
I've heard stories.
Well, I can tell, it's pretty basic. I mean, because as the Melrose family, see, Les bought in, but Jane Dahl was a brother-in-law. Bobcats were all animals.
Yeah.
And that's their influence overran me.
And they're cats.
What?
Bobcats were cats, and the names of the tractors were cats, right?
Yeah.
Panther, tiger.
Yeah.
Cougar,
Yeah.
Puma.
No, but that's how it came about. It is their influence that changed it. And you see, it wasn't them alone. What happened, they had sold out to Clark Equipment. There was people from Bobcat that came into the Steiger plant to work. So there was more and more of that influence. I was on the board, but a board member doesn't have the same influence that the CEO does, you know. That's almost the beginning of the end. I know I missed some things, but that's about it. But the one thing I have to say And I think this happens to a lot of companies where you find someone, well, I made this company. No, there was so many people along the line that were involved. But not only that, if they hadn't shown up at just the right time, the company would have never been there. I look back, it was amazing. It's just like this banker and then Earl, and it's just one thing after another. It just happened. And it was, I always say it must have supposed to have been, or it would have never been. Because, yes, I did my part, but I didn't make it all happen. You know.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for your time and sharing your story with us today. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Any more questions?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.